I have owned my Yamaha Tenere 700 motorcycle for 2 years. I've enjoyed riding on twisty two-lane paved highways, on dirt and gravel forest roads, and through small towns. I've gone overnight camping to the coast and through the desert and in the forest. The T7 has plenty of power for my needs. It has a predictable and reliable engine with good torque, and nice sound comes from its parallel twin. So why am I thinking of downsizing from the T7? The Tenere is in demand and most owners love this bike. The answer falls into two categories: the characteristics of the bike itself that I don't care for, and my own needs and abilities for riding an adventure motorcycle. Stick around for this video and I'll explain why I am considering downsizing from my T7. Plus, I'll give you my preliminary analysis of 7 small mid-size adventure bikes that could potentially replace my T7. I've ridden motorcycles most of my adult life, primarily on pavement. My first motorcycle was a classic Honda Sport 50, a small bore motorcycle. I also owned a Kawasaki 120, a dirt bike that I managed to take off the road and smash into a tree. Did more damage to the bike than myself. And in the 1970s and 1980s, I owned 2 Honda CL350s. This is a Honda Scrambler with an upswept pipe. And to me, it kind of hit that sweet spot of mostly road orientation, but I could take it on dirt and gravel roads as well. Over the years, I acquired larger motorcycles. My last road motorcycle was a Honda Shadow 750. When I retired, I moved to Southern Oregon, and in this region there are miles and miles of dirt and gravel forest roads that traverse public lands. And I became interested in riding and exploring this area. And the Honda Shadow 750 is not a bike that's suited for that type of adventure. In 2020, I was interested in investigating the world of adventure motorcycles. And at that time, during the pandemic, there was a lot of hype about a new motorcycle coming to the United States. That's the Yamaha Tenere 700, mid-size motorcycle. It had been in Europe for a few years, so I was able to review a number of YouTube videos about it. So I figured it'd be about the right size, since I was riding a Honda Shadow 750 and the Yamaha Tenere 700 is about the same displacement, a little bit less. So I went to my local Yamaha dealer in January of 2021 and I put a $500 deposit down to order a new Yamaha Tenere 700 adventure motorcycle. Now, during the pandemic, there were no bikes to be ridden, so I bought the Tenere 700 sight unseen, had never even flipped my leg over the top of it. And 5 months later, I get a phone call from the dealer that my T7 had arrived. I went out, picked it up, had them loaded into the back of my trailer, came home, unloaded the bike, decided to flip a leg over it for the first time, and doing so, the bike went off on its side. I had my first crash with 0 miles on the motorcycle, and I destroyed one of the plastic panels on the side. I realized then that this was going to be a little different beast than my Honda Shadow 750. So after owning my T7 for 2 years and putting 6,000 miles on it, why am I now considering downsizing to a smaller adventure motorcycle? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's really 2 reasons, 2 general areas, I should say. One is characteristics of the T7 that I really don't care for, that are deal breakers basically for me. And the second characteristic area are my own personal needs for adventure motorcycle riding. Everybody has a different need, I think, and what's helped me in the last 2 years of riding my T7 is to help define really what I'm looking for in an adventure motorcycle now that I'm in my 70s. So let me start out with the characteristics of the T7 that I don't care for, that are basically long-term deal breakers for me. Number one is the weight. So the wet weight of the T7 is about 450 pounds. Now, if you compare the weight of larger adventure motorcycles, that's 450 pounds is considered somewhat light. But that's still an awful lot of weight on a motorcycle to pick up alone. Along with that is that the T7 is also top heavy. The center of gravity is very high, the tank sits high, and when it's full of fuel, the T7 tends to want to tip over when you come to a stop, a slow stop, or a turn. There's a lot of weight in the bike, and a lot of that weight sits up high, and once it starts to go over, it's hard for someone like myself. I'm not that strong. It's hard for me to keep it from falling down. A third characteristic that I really don't like is when it does fall down, the bike lays very flat, a lot flatter than many other motorcycles. So some of the methods that are out there to pick up a fallen bike, like backing up into it and using your hands to lift it up, doesn't work with the T7. I found I can oftentimes pick it up by using a handlebar lift method, but if it's in an awkward position or if I'm tired, there's some times when I haven't been able to lift up the motorcycle. So I bought an Easton motorcycle winch to help me pick it up in those times when I'm too tired or the bike's in an awkward spot. I ride alone a lot, so I'm really concerned about getting into a situation where the bike's gone down and I can't pick it up for whatever reason. So that's kind of a deal breaker for me right there too. And the number 4 characteristic that I don't care for on the T7 is the seat height. Now, I understand most adventure motorcycles and dual sport motorcycles have high seat heights, and the T7, I think the seat height stock is about 34.4 inches. Now, I'm coming from a street-oriented Honda Shadow with a seat height of 26.5 inches. There's quite a bit of difference. To fix the height of the T7, I went and bought some Soupy's lowering links, and I lowered the bike a little bit, lowered the front shocks also. I'm 6 foot tall, but my inseam is only 30 inches, and I was unable to plant my feet on the ground, which really affected my ability to keep the bike from falling over on slow stops. So with the lowering links, I'm now able to comfortably put my feet on the ground, which helps stabilize the bike when I come to a stop. The fifth thing that I also don't care for on the T7 is, I'd say a bit of a deal breaker too, is there are tubes in the tires with the T7. Early on, when I bought the bike, I had my first flat in the field and realized what a real pain in the butt it is to change a flat tire on an adventure motorcycle out in the field. I really don't want to have to be doing that often, if ever. So the ability to look at another bike that has tubeless tires is, for me, kind of an option that I want to look at. I understand there are options to get tubeless tires on the T7, but that would just add even more money that I've already put into it than I would really want. I'd rather just look at other options because I have, now 5 different deal breakers for the T7. So those are the characteristics of the T7 that I really don't care for. What about the other side of it? My own needs, my own riding style, my own abilities, my own desires. And that fits into the equation too for wanting to downsize from the T7 to something smaller. So first of all, I mostly ride local. I'm about a mile from National Forest roads, and I find that I'm out riding for a few hours, and I come back home. I don't have any plans to do any really long rides, no transcontinental rides, nothing from Argentina to Alaska. I do a few times a year. I'll do an overnighter or maybe a multi-night ride, and I think I can probably carry the camping gear on a smaller motorcycle if I outfit it right, just as well as what I do on the T7. And I'm not a destination guy for the most part too, so I tend to like to ride alone, solo, so I can plan the trip myself. I can take a side trip. I don't need to get to the destination. I can turn around. And so riding solo and riding alone means that I'm also very dependent upon myself for everything, including safety. And a smaller bike, as I mentioned, would be easier to lift up and fix, a little bit easier for me to maneuver as an aging solo rider. Another one of my characteristics too is that I do not ride fast. I ride slow, like to smell the roses, but I also ride slow just from a safety standpoint. I feel much more comfortable going slower probably than most every other rider that I've ever ridden with. The other part of it too is that I probably ride on 50-50 pavement to off pavement. The off pavement riding that I do is mostly dirt forest roads, gravel, some rocky areas too, but you know, I'm not going on anything really gnarly. I'm not going through a lot of mud or deep sand. I tend to avoid those areas, and I think the smaller bike would work fine on the type of road surfaces that I'm planning on riding, that I'm used to riding. I also don't ride on interstate highways or any of the fast moving traffic on the divided highways. The only times I really ride on an interstate or a divided highway if I really need to get from A to B and that's the only route. Otherwise I'll avoid it and take the longer side route because that's my style of adventure riding. I want to go out and see the countryside. I don't want to blast past it at 80 miles an hour. And finally, I have to recognize I'm turning 74 years old. I'm not a young man. I've gotten out from a pretty serious motorcycle accident last year, and I haven't fully recovered from that physically, as well as probably emotionally too. And a smaller bike is a little easier for me to handle. I feel more comfortable. I have the confidence in it that sometimes is lacking when I'm on the T7. So now that you understand my reasons for wanting to downsize from my T7, you're probably wondering, what bike is Bruce looking at right now or looking for? Well, I'm looking for more or less a group of bikes. I've decided not to go the route of a dual sport. Some folks have suggested that I just add another bike into my stable, keep the T7 and get maybe a 250cc dual sport bike. And I've decided I don't want to go that route. One is I really don't want to have two bikes. I don't ride often enough, and I'm really not a dirt rider. I mean, I can get an adventure bike that can handle the type of roads that I really want to ride on. A dual sport will be a little bit overkill for me on the ability to ride, off road. So what I'm looking at is a group that is called small adventure bikes or small mid-adventure bikes. I've seen it called also. And these are basically adventure bikes, 400cc capacity or smaller. And I've come up with a list of 7 of these bikes that I've decided to evaluate. And by evaluate, I don't mean ride. I haven't gone out to really ride them. I think that would be a difficult task because some of the bikes are not really that readily available. And I think if I just do an analysis of these 7 bikes from kind of a spreadsheet standpoint, I'll be able to narrow the 7 down quite a bit to maybe one or two bikes that I would really want to look at in depth. So like a true nerdy geek, I created a spreadsheet. And in the spreadsheet, I made a column of all the specifications that meant something to me. The two biggest were seat height and curb weight, wet weight. I basically wanted a motorcycle that was less than 400 pounds and had a seat less than 35 inches. In the spreadsheet then, I put all 7 of the motorcycles, plus I also added the Tenere 700 to compare it against all the other smaller motorcycles. And being a true nerd, I color-coded the specifications either green or red, or I didn't color-code them at all. The green meant it was a positive specification for that bike, red meant it was a negative one, and non-color coding meant it was sort of neutral or not as important to me. So if you just look at the Tenere 700, which is the bike that I'm downsizing from, the positive specifications for that are the horsepower and the torque and the ground clearance. Those are, all 3 of those specifications are better than the smaller motorcycles. The negative parts that I don't like on specifications, as I said before, are the seat height and the curb weight. Also, after looking at the spreadsheet, some things popped out, and I was able to eliminate 2 of the potential motorcycles from my own personal list, and that's the Honda CRF 300 Rally and the Suzuki DRZ 400S. And the reasons that I've eliminated them from considering for myself is they had quite a few negatives that I didn't care for. One is the seat height on both is very high, and for the CRF Rally, it's also has a lower horsepower, lower torque. The DRZ 400S is a single carbureted engine, and so I really didn't want to go that route. It's also only a 5-speed, whereas all the other bikes in consideration are 6 speeds. But it did have a very high ground clearance, as does the CRF, the Honda CRF. Those 2 bikes then, and actually after looking at them too, in my mind, they're more of a dual sport bike than a true adventure bike. Yes, I know that can be made into an adventure bike. Itchy Boots is riding the Honda CRF 300 all over the world as an adventure bike, but that's mostly dirt-oriented bikes, and I'm looking for 70-30 or 50-50 maybe at the most pavement to dirt orientation. So I think there's better choices for myself than the DRZ 400 and the CRF. So those are coming off my list. And that leaves me now with a list of 5 bikes, and I think they're all good. Only one of these bikes I've ridden, and that's the Royal Enfield Himalayan 411. I had that bike for 11 days in Mexico last year, and yes, it's the bike that I managed to smack into a utility pole and end up in the hospital. But that wasn't the bike's fault, that was my fault. So it was a fun bike to ride, a little bit of a clunker, I'd say, kind of in between a Volkswagen Bug and an Army tank. It chugs right along. It's the least expensive on this list too, but it's also a bit heavy at 439 pounds. I did drop it once, and it was a little bit of an effort to lift it back up. But it's a decent bike. I don't know what it does off the road though. The Honda, the 500 CB500X, is of course the largest bike here with a two-cylinder. So it's a not a single like most of the rest of the bikes, and it also has a weight issue at 439 pounds as well, a little bit more than I would want in weight, and it's comes with standard with an alloy wheels. I kind of prefer the spoke wheels. Not that there's a big difference probably in the type of off-riding I do, I just think that they look better. And the KTM and the BMW both come from a very good pedigree family. Of course, a lot of the larger adventure bikes you see out there are the BMWs and the KTMs, and these are their little baby adventure bikes, both made in India, whereas all their other bikes are made in Austria or Germany. And I don't think that's really an issue from a quality standpoint, at least that's my own opinion. But they're fairly similar. The BMW is a little bit less powered, doesn't quite have as much power as the KTM, I don't think. And it also comes with alloy wheels, instead of the spoke wheels like the latest model of the KTM. And being that the KTM and the BMW are manufactured in India for that market as one of their markets, the bike itself, the Ergonomics, is a little bit smaller. I'm 6 foot tall, so those might be a little bit cramped for me. The Versys 300 appears to be an all-around good entry-level bike. It's a twin cylinder. The only other one on my list is the CB500X. Downside is that it requires tubes, at least that's how you purchase it. And it's also, I have seen it in the showroom. It's doesn't look like an expensive made bike, but I'm sure it's fine. And I think what their market is really looking for is an entry-level rider, maybe more so than somebody who's coming down from a larger bike like me to a smaller bike. But it appears to be a good option to investigate a little bit more. So these 5 bikes have some things in common and some things not. Not every bike checks everything off on my list. I was not expecting to find that bike that would meet all my needs. But I think one of these 5 could probably meet my overall need of getting a little bit lighter and more of a confidence building bike that meets my riding needs too. So I'm probably going to pick from this list at some time soon. Is there anything that I'm missing? Does anybody have a bike that you think should go onto my list? Again, I'm really not looking for a dual sport or something larger like an African Twin, so I wouldn't put those on my list. And is there one of these bikes in particular that you like or don't like? I'd like to hear about that too. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video, a little bit of a nerd fest going through numbers on some bikes to help me decide. And if you did like it, please give me a thumbs up, and I will see you next time on one of my senior moments.